We've got Anthony in Florida on the line now with Jenna and Matt. You talked about the influence of religion over people. Why do I think that the influence is so strong if there is no God? Is that kind of the summation of your question, Anthony?
Yes, that's the question. Is it okay if I give you some background on myself?
Sure.
So first of all, I grew up Pentecostal. You're well versed. I think you said you were Baptist. I'm sure you're familiar with a lot of the doctrine.
Yeah.
Basically, physical manifestation of things. People shout, scream, dance, this and that. Yeah. Now, if you walk into a Pentecostal church and you see this, whether you believe it to be real or not, that's still a bunch of people being influenced by something.
Mm-hmm.
So my question to you is, like, humans have moved past believing in a lot of bullshit that we used to believe in. Why won't the concept of a God, why won't that go away? And why do humans continue to believe in this?
Well, it will go away, and it is going away to some extent. The world is becoming increasingly secular, and church attendance and belief in specific gods is at least on the decline. But when you ask a question like, religion clearly has influence over people, I agree. And then you say, why do I think that influence is so strong if there is no God? First of all, it's not my position necessarily that there is no God. But even if we were to assume there's no God, that doesn't change the influence that religion has, because religion is a package of ideas. Irrespective of whether there's a God or anything supernatural behind them, it's a package of ideas. And that's why there are so many different religions that point to so many different gods. You know, Hindu versions of God versus Islamic versions of God versus Jewish and Christian, and et cetera. You go through all these. All of these can influence people. And it's because we as human beings are, there are things we don't know, and religions claim to know those things, or at least offer us access to someone who probably would know those things. We have fears about the unknown, and religions primarily exist to get rid of those fears, although religions create new fears that they also solve. All of this is appealing because it is ideas. We are walking brains that test the universe that we're in. And as long as someone is making claims that feel right or feel comforting, that we cannot demonstrate are actually false, that's going to be appealing. It's always going to be more appealing for you to think that you know what happens after you die than to sit around and agonize over not knowing what happens after you die. It is a comforting lie, or if it is in fact true, and I don't know which of the various afterlife models are true, all of those are potentially comforting in getting rid of this fear. The key, and what has been working, is to teach skepticism and critical thinking, to get people more comfortable with saying, I don't know, so that maybe they can realize, hey, I'm not the only one who doesn't know. I have no idea why there's something instead of nothing, or if that question even makes sense. I have no idea if there's an afterlife. I don't have any good reason to think there is one, and I have really good reasons to think there's not an afterlife. But for somebody to pretend they have the answer to that is kind of disingenuous, but it is definitely appealing.
I know that I personally believed that I had that answer, that I thought that I knew for a fact that there is heaven, there was purgatory, there are angels and all that stuff. And that was because I grew up in a culture that everybody was kind of on the same page. So it was just how I grew up. Everybody that I had encountered and had a conversation with up until I was, 16 or 17, believed that there was a God, or at least when I brought it up or it came up, they didn't give me any kind of any kind of sign that they don't believe. Maybe because they didn't want to be rude or something like that. But I had never been exposed to any other idea. I had just thought, well, this is what everybody believes. That's got to be what's true. So I can say that's why I believed, and that's why I didn't promote skepticism in my life. It was a comfort to me. It was all that I knew. But if I had been taught different ways, like skepticism, if I had been taught, psychological ways of how to take care of my body and take care of my mental health, rather than retreat to a bedroom and go onto my knees and just close my hands and hope that that'll just magically make everything work. I have better solutions. I just didn't think that that would be possible.
I see. Okay, well, I understand your perspective. You mentioned that secularism is on the rise, or on the rise. Is that really the case, though? Because in my everyday life, I still see people going to church. I still see people talking about church. With this whole coronavirus thing, I've seen people post comments on social media about, various things about whatever they believe. It doesn't really seem to be on the decline to me, like people claim.
Well, one of the things is that you're using a sample set, which we are all likely to use, which is, well, I see people doing this and I see this. Instead of using my personal experience, I tend to go to the data and the polls. And so for example, there's an article tied to a Gallup poll from April of 2019, so just 1 year ago, that shows that half of Americans are church members, down from 70% in 1999. So we went from 70% of the population in 1999 as the member of some church to 50% of Americans are part of some church in 20 years. And you look at church attendance and church numbers and polls asking people, do they believe in a God? How important is a God belief to them? All of those things are on the decline in all of the, reliable, responsible studies. And I have friends who are pastors who are talking about how church attendance is on the decline. Now, part of this has changed because mega churches got more popular for a while and people wanted to go to the church where everybody was. So some of the smaller churches shut down, but that shouldn't change the total number of people who are active, who are members and who will participate in churches. And from like around 1998, 73% of people had a religious preference. And 18 years later, it was down to 64% had a religious preference. So there were, nearly 10% of the population stopped having a religious preference in the span of a decade.
Right. So
sounds good to me.
Data.
Yeah, this isn't me, but I mean, by all means, go just Google church attendance and you'll find the same stats that I'm referencing. And Pew Forum has studies up about attendance at church services and how it's dropping, how often people go to church, how important it is, and they break it down by denominations and other things. So the fact that you might see, like, if I were to try to do statistics kind of the same way that you did, then my evidence would be that nobody goes to church anymore because the people I hang out with don't go to church anymore unless they're like going to take notes.
And I was deconverted, so I'm Exhibit A. Oh, you were deconverted. Probably half of the people that go to the ACA were deconverted.
Yep, Dan and everybody else. Is that kind of cleared up a little bit? I mean, it's pretty easy, Anthony, just, Google and then also research so that you're not getting statistics from one source, that you maybe check a couple of reliable sources. Because if it's like ChristianPropagandaMagazine.com says church attendance is on the rise, but Gallup polls and Pew studies and independent organizations that don't have any kind of bias are reporting something different, maybe we should stick with the less biased sources. And also, if you go to Atheism Rocks, theismsucks.com and you find I wouldn't use those statistics.
Well, okay, so what can you give me information on where I can find, I'm sure you studied this, the core of my argument, the reason why I called, and that's psychological effect. That I'm not even saying religion, just the concept, because I know there's different gods, I know there's different belief systems. I'm talking about the concept of a God existing. What can I find information on that explains this? Because this is one thing I never hear atheists talk about. Whether you believe it to be true or not, it's influential. People convert, people change their lives for the better. A lot of good comes out of religion, a lot of good comes out of people supposedly giving their life to Christ or whatever.
Yeah.
So why does this have so much more influence than Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny or aliens, Bigfoot, any of that. Why?
Oh, because people have been killed for years over being forced to believe this stuff.
So it's about what is contained in the ideas. So the Easter Bunny doesn't tell you anything about how you should live your life. So that's not going to have as much impact on people as something that's telling people how to live their life. And you'll find millions of people who go to secular self-help seminars because they've found the one guru who's telling them, you need to empower you and do. People find different ideas like that empowering. And when you are floundering around through life and don't necessarily know what you should do, there are people who will benefit from someone saying, here's what you should do. I would argue that's the reason that Jordan Peterson is popular, because he's giving people easy, simple things that they can do that ostensibly should improve their life, even if he's wrong. But we see this whether or not there's even any sort of God or religion attached to it. Packaged sets of beliefs and gregarious, charismatic speakers who can inspire people. This is the way human beings have always been inspired. None of it points to any evidence for a God. And the clear way to do that is to say Christianity's had a massive influence. If that is an argument that therefore the God of Christianity is real and true, then how do we deal with the massive influence of Islam or Hinduism, which are pointing to either a different version of a similar God or completely different gods? Those things have impacted people's lives too. And so if we find that the one thing that all of these have in common is that they put themselves in a position of authority and have a collection of statements that are designed to influence the mind of people, then that's where we should put the credit for the influence, not on a proposed God outside of it.
Well, in addition to that, when I think about, the town of thousands of people, well, the neighboring town of thousands of people that I grew up in going to church to, most of these people did not logic themselves into this. They didn't have this class, or they didn't get together and try to figure out which one was right. And what happened was they were born into a family that raised them to believe in, Lutheranism or Catholicism or whatever. And they just believe it because dad said so and mom said so and grandpa said so. And I personally don't think that most people choose this stuff. I think most people are brought up believing it because their parents were, and their parents were, and their parents were.
But the thing is, I'm sorry, Jen, I wouldn't say most people. Like, I'll give you an example. Back when I was younger, there was this guy that I used to hang out with. And me and him grew up together. We went to high school and all that. And we used to do all the typical teenager stuff. Drugs, chasing women, drinking underage, all this stuff. This guy used to do a lot of dirt with me. And we so happened to both have parents that went to the church, went to Pentecostal church. So, of course, we would have to go. We didn't want to go. We had to go.
Right.
One day, this guy comes in. He's like a minister from some other church, like a missionary from somewhere. And this guy comes in, and he was walking around the congregation, praying for people. As the Pentecostals call it, the spirit was moving. It was pretty intense, even though I wasn't personally into it myself. I was observing.
Mm-hmm.
So I was standing next to my friend. And keep in mind, this guy had never talked about God, never talked about wanting to get saved, anything like that. He was just like me, a bad kid. The minister walks up to my friend, touches him. All he does is touch him on the head, and my friend just goes crazy. Well, as you would, what the Pentecostals do, going crazy with the shouting and all that stuff. And this came completely out of nowhere, and I was just looking like, wow. And it's things like that where I'm like, maybe there is a God. You know what I mean? Like,
the thing is, Anthony, it didn't.
This is what I mean by influence.
The thing is, well, there's a couple of issues to address here. First of all, it didn't come from out of nowhere. Okay, we are all creatures of habit and observation, and so when people are slain in the spirit, whether it's Benny Hinn or whatever else, we've studied this. There's a book from the 19th century called Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowd. It's crowds. It's not isolated to Christianity. We see the same sort of responses within voodoo religions and shamanistic religions and things like that. People are trained, whether they know it or not, whether they wanted to be or not, to react and respond in a certain way. Magicians and con artists exploit these things in people. Magicians do it for entertainment, and con artists do it for financial or power advantages. So your friend clearly had some idea of what was supposed to happen in that scenario. But once again, if we look at a scenario where that happens and other scenarios where it happened, the one common thread isn't, hey, there's this God or this particular God. It doesn't matter what you point to. Maybe it's like Dumbo's magic feather, that when you hold up Dumbo's magic feather and say, this is God, God can do anything. Once people start believing that, then they fall into certain patterns of habits that are consistent with that church, which is why a Pentecostal church, despite worshiping the same God that I did as a Southern Baptist, has a completely different feel and experience than the Baptist church did. And so when you have human minds that are susceptible to influence, the religions that we have now are the ones that were demonstrably best at influencing people. The religions that didn't have that effect on people are the ones that have died out. They no longer have great audiences and everything else. So it is the how impactful the ideas are and the rituals and the traditions and making yourself subject to an authority. This is essentially in the same category as how I'm on dangerous footing actually saying this. My view of hypnosis is that there's no demonstrable hypnotic state, and that basically what we see with hypnosis, whether it's stage hypnotism, etc., are two people agreeing to play act. And that doesn't mean that somebody's lying. It means you are giving someone else permission to tell you what to do, and you will go along with it. You've been given some excuse to not feel as responsible for your actions. And religions often do the same thing, not in the sense of being hypnotized, but in the sense of controlling those portions of the brain and accessing them so that people are more susceptible to that. I'd recommend you could go to skepticsannotatedDictionary.com. You could do research from a number of different skeptics organizations, but the book that I mentioned, Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds, there have been a number of psychological experiments where the more someone speaks as if they are an authority, the more likely a certain portion of the population is to just go along with it, which is how you get otherwise good people working with the Nazis or shocking people in the Milgram experiments, even though they wouldn't have done this on their own. We are born to trust authorities, like our parents, because that's a good thing. And then other people take advantage of that. Religions take advantage of it. Con artists take advantage of it. Magicians take advantage of it. It's about who we are as people. And there's a ton of stuff to research, but it's way more than we're going to be able to get into here. But hopefully we've given you like a start at some places to look.
Yes, definitely understand your perspective. I'll check out your recommendation.
One question to ask yourself, Anthony, is, so you have a friend, and I know you didn't finish the story, but I'm assuming that your friend who used to run around and do bad stuff with you had a life-changing positive experience from this time in church. Is that correct?
No, actually, to be honest, after I witnessed that, he went right back to doing what he was doing.
Oh,
that's the point I'm trying to make. Is like people might say, "Oh, he was faking it," or he was just doing what everyone else was doing. It was just that one time. He had no reason to do that. He had no one to show off for. If anything, he was probably embarrassed by it.
It might be, but what you'll find, I'm still going to make the same point, even though your story actually makes my point better. And that is, if you find people who've been changed for the better by religion, which is something you referenced earlier, I need to ask yourself, are there people who have been changed for the better through means other than religion? Like, are Jenna and I generally better people now as atheists, adhering to principles of secular humanism and rational skepticism and critical thinking? Are we fundamentally better people than we were then?
Absolutely. It's possible for someone to be a better person without believing in a God. I don't tie my morality to believing in a God. What I'm saying is that the influence is still there. A lot of people change for the better because of religion, but I'm not saying that.
But also some people change for the worse because of religion. Because if your religion, for example, makes you a bigot, either with regard to race or gender or sexual issues and things like that, that's making you a worse person with regard to interacting with other people. And so if religion can make you better or worse, and a lack of religion can make you better or worse, then clearly we're not necessarily pointing to anything true or better. When we point to religion, we're just pointing to the one that is more popular because it's been in a privileged position in society where religion has had massive tax-free privilege, de facto, here's what we need. And because it's held by the overwhelming majority of people still, it has that status.
Well, wouldn't you say there's good and bad in everything? I mean, there's some people that become police and become assets to their community. Some people become police and become asshole cops.
Wait, so are you saying that because some people can become religious and become better people, that means that religion is good?
I mean, that's what I mean. In general, religion has a lot of good to it. Of course, there's people that abuse it. People abuse everything: politics, positions of power. People abuse a lot of things. Religion is no different. I think that for the most part, a lot comes good out of the concept of a divine being.
So why do we need it?
That's the question. Why?
I think for me,
why is it a thing?
I think for me, it is because thinking and understanding and being comfortable with a lack of knowledge is terrifying for the overwhelming majority of people. The fear of death, the fear of loneliness, the fear of there not being justice. And so religions come in and say, I've got you covered after death. I've got you covered right now. And there will be a sense of justice. You don't have to worry about it. And that lets people not worry about it. The problem is, and the only thing I care about is it true? Because I have no evidence that any religious claim tied to gods or the supernatural or anything else is true. And the same is the case for a sense of justice. And that puts me in a position where I have to recognize that all the available evidence points to, if we want justice, we have to be the ones seeking and enacting the justice. Right. We have to be the dispensers of justice, and we have to do better at it because religion isn't doing shit.
So do you, Mike and Jenna, sorry, Matt and Jenna, do you think the world will be better off without religion?
I don't know.
Who's to say it wouldn't become worse? Maybe if it was somehow discovered that there's absolutely no God, more people will become nihilistic. Maybe
I personally,
because more people.
Sorry, I think that it would depend on how and why it became not religious. Like if it was because people educated themselves about how to determine whether or not something was true, and that's why it disappeared, then yes, I think that it would be a better place, because I think that most of the world's problems are the basis of most of the world problems. It comes from human ignorance, when it comes to racism and prejudice and global warming and all of that. So I think that would make it better. But if it was some kind of like magical, okay, nobody's allowed to practice religion anymore, it's banned, then I think that would create a lot of problems, because it does create a comfort for a lot of people.
Yeah. So, Jenna and I are in agreement here. This is something I talked about before. I can't say, hey, if religion goes away, waving a magic wand, that would be a good thing.
Right.
What I can say is that given the available evidence we have, yes, there are people who, after they give up religion, are going to become more nihilistic, but that's also something you can deal with education and teaching like that. What I would say is there are good principles within some religions which you can keep because they are good principles while doing away with the bad stuff. So keep the good stuff wherever you find it, whether it originated in some religious text or some small conclave of people. Keep the good stuff, but get rid of the stuff that isn't demonstrably true and isn't good. And then you will almost certainly have a better world. I can't show that we're not going to, run into extinction because of bad ideas. But if the goal, which is the goal of skepticism, is to eliminate bad ideas, then the only thing left is good ideas, right?
Right.
If we end up with a worse world by eliminating bad ideas, that would be very, very surprising to me, but I'm still going to favor the truth over a comforting lie.
I understand. Well, that's one thing I respect about you, Matt, is that even if I disagree, you have an interesting perspective. So I respect you for that. I watched the show. I'm a fan. I don't want to take up too much time. I'll let you move on to the next caller, but thanks.
Thank you very much, Anthony. I appreciate it.
Thank you. It was nice talking to you, Anthony.